Hello and welcome to Lunchtime Politics. First, the highlights. Ahead of Inauguration Day, President Buhari confers national honors on President-elect Bola Tinubu and Vice President-elect Kashim Shettima. State governors announced dissolution of cabinet ahead of May 29. Plus, the Department of State Services warns the public against plans by subversive elements to disrupt inauguration ceremony. Warm welcome to the program. I'm Millicent Walker in Lagos. Today begins somewhat officially transition activities lined up ahead of May the 29th, 2023. Today is the investiture of Mr. Tinubu, Bola Tinubu, with the Grand Commander of the Order of the Federal Republic, GCFR, and the Vice President-elect Kashim Shettima as the Grand Commander of the Order of the Niger, GCON, by President Muhammadu Buhari. Mr. Boss Mustafa, Chairman of the Presidential Transition Committee and Secretary to the Government of the Federation, had earlier in the week announced the highlights of transition activities lined up ahead of May the 29th. About 65 world leaders, including heads of state, have been invited to the inauguration of the president-elect, who will be sworn in as the 16th president of Nigeria. Also expected at the nation's 7th transition ceremony are past presidents, diplomats, heads of international organizations, and prominent Nigerians, as well as representatives of foreign governments and agencies. Meanwhile, the Department of State Services, DSS, said it is aware of plans by subversive elements to disrupt the inauguration of the next president and governors on May the 29th across the country. Spokesman of the service, Dr. Peter Afunaya, said today that the aim is to undermine security agencies' efforts at ensuring peaceful ceremonies, as well as creating panic and fear among members of the public. The service is advising Nigerians to adhere strictly to security and civil protocols during the events. It says the major highlight of activities is the swearing-in of the president on the 29th of May 2023 in Abuja. On the same date, new governors will also be inaugurated in most of the states. In the tweet, the service says it is aware of plans by subversive elements to disrupt the programs in parts of the country that aim to undermine security agencies' efforts at ensuring peaceful ceremonies, as well as creating panic and fear among members of the public. Based on these, citizens, the media, civil society organizations are advised to adhere strictly to security and civil protocols during the event. The DSS is also urging the public to shun fake news, false alarms, and others capable of inflaming division, tension, and violence prior to and after the exercises. Meanwhile, President Muhammadu Buhari has directed his ministers to return to their offices and continue work. The Minister of Information and Culture, Alhaji Lai Mohammed, made this known at a briefing shortly after the valedictory session on Wednesday. Many had expected that the president would dissolve his cabinet at the valedictory Federal Executive Council meeting, which he chaired in Abuja. Even though the president had taken official photos with the council, the Information Minister debunked news making the rounds that the cabinet has been dissolved. According to Mr. Mohammed, the dissolution is fake news. He added that the ministers will work until the 29th of May. The 8-year tenure of President Buhari, which commenced on May 29, 2015, comes to an end on Monday, May the 29th, 2023. But nonetheless, days to the end of President Buhari's tenure, ministers, while some have commenced the handover to the permanent secretaries, others are preparing to do so. The Minister of Defense, Bashir Magashi, we understand, is reported to have handed over to the permanent secretary A source said Mr. Magashi, a retired Major General of the Nigerian Army, has already directed the permanent secretary in the ministry to take charge. For the Ministry of Water Resources, the minister has carried out the assignment professionally as an engineer and urged the incoming minister to be committed to the development of the sector. The Minister of Sports, Sunday Dare, handed over to the permanent secretary, Alhaji Ismaila Abubakar, and according to sources within the ministry, Mr. Dare will be honored with the Association of National Olympic Committees of Africa for his role in the development of the association. In the Ministry of Education, it was gathered that Mr. Adamu has started packing his personal effects. Also, officials of the Ministry of Labour and Employment, as well as federal agencies under it, are currently perfecting documents in their respective departments, as well as parastatals. The Minister of Special Duties and Intergovernmental Affairs, Senator George Akume, also prepared to leave the ministry, ready with his handover notes. That's according to sources from within the ministry. The Minister of Science, Technology and Innovation, Dr. Olorinimbe Mamora, may have held his last official duty as minister. This was when he went on inspection tour of some projects by parastatal of the ministry. Mr. Mamara was at the Raw Materials Research and Development Council to inspect some ongoing building of pilot plants in the nation's capital. The Minister of Communications and Digital Economy, Professor Asa Pantami, also performed his last assignment last week when he inaugurated the Blockchain Committee in Abuja. And just a few days to the end of the present administration, the FCT Minister, Malam Mohammed Bello, ordered the demolition of popular markets in Area 10. Last week, he announced that the Federal Executive Council had approved some contracts running into billions of naira for the Federal Capital Territory, while the Humanitarian Minister commissioned 6 legacy projects in Zamfara. We understand appointments for a new governing council and management were also made in the Northeast Development Commission, and the ministry signed an MOU with the UN on nutrition for students recently. Well, now to the states. The Lagos State Governor, Babajide Sanwo-Olu, has announced the dissolution of his cabinet in preparation for the swearing-in, marking the start of his administration's second term in office, together with the Deputy Governor, Dr. Kadir Obafemi Hamzat. The dissolution exercise, with effect from close of work Friday tomorrow, also affects the governor's aides, senior special assistants, personal assistants, technical assistants, and others. Governor Sanwo-Olu's decision is contained in a circular which is signed by the head of service. There was also a similar situation in Oyo State, where ahead of May the 29th inauguration for a second term of 4 years, the governor, Seyi Makinde, dissolved the state's executive council, terminated the appointment of all political office holders with effect from Tuesday, May the 23rd. In a letter signed by the Chief of Staff to the governor, Chairman, Transition and Inauguration Committee, Mr. Makinde has directed members of all affected political appointees to hand over government property in their custody. Elsewhere, for the Yobe State Governor, Maimala Buni, he says his administration is yet to dissolve the cabinet, as he said this during the council's valedictory state executive council meeting. The Commissioner for Wealth Creation, Empowerment and Employment Generation, Abdullahi Bego, disclosed this while addressing newsmen after the meeting, noting that the cabinet will be dissolved before the governor takes the oath of office for a second time.
We express our gratitude to His Excellency. We have commended him and praised him for his magnanimity, for his perseverance, and for all the work that he did over the last 4 years, and prayed for him to succeed in the 4 years that we're going to face, inshallah. So these are some of the things that we discussed during the valedictory session. I just want to say briefly that the ESCO has yet to be dissolved. The ESCO will be dissolved any moment within the week. That's a tradition. The tradition before His Excellency, the Governor, His Excellency, the Deputy Governor could be administered their oaths of office, the ESCO will naturally be dissolved. The ESCO has yet to be dissolved, but we can expect an announcement on the dissolution of the ESCO any moment within the week, meaning from now through the week. It can be over the next 1 hour, over the next 1 day, over the next 2 days, but definitely within this week, the ESCO will be dissolved and a new ESCO will be established after His Excellency has taken his oath of office in the weeks and months to come.
Well, to talk some more about activities leading up to Inauguration Day, joining me right now virtually is Dr. Kayode Shola, a research professor of African politics at the University of Lagos. Welcome to the program. Doctor, if you can hear me, how significant are these transition activities this week in the run-up to May the 29th?
Yeah, good afternoon.
Welcome.
Yes, please take this again.
All right. I was asking how significant are activities, in the run-up to May the 29th?
I can't hear you at all. I'm sorry. This is...
So just hold on a moment. How about now? Can you hear me now? Well, we might have to come back to our guest by the time we sort out that audio situation. But let's talk to you about... Okay, I understand he's back on. Dr. Shola, can you hear me now?
Okay, now I can.
All right, much better. Thanks again. So my first question earlier was, how significant are the transition activities in the run-up to May the 29th, Inauguration Day? All right, we might want to sort that out and bring you back that interview a little later. Let's move on now. As the President Muhammadu-led administration winds down after 8 years, opinions on the performance of his government continue to pour in. Now, a former presidential candidate of the United Democratic Party, Mr. Godson Orji, well, he's deploring the apparent lack of national interest shown by leaders of the country. He says he had high hopes that President Buhari would have fixed the issue when he came into power.
There is no national interest. And that's why people, like you said, they do things the best way they know how. They come in, whatever they think or whatever people around them convince them to do, they do it. And of course, because we don't have that, regional interests come in, religious interests come in, all kinds of personal interests come in. There is no time, and then people will now tell you, oh, politics is about interest, it's not about no permanent friend and all that. That's crap. The interest that we're talking about here is national interest, and that is what is missing. And until we get our national interest clearly defined, we will have all this kind of hiccups all over the place. So we need to have that clearly, and that's what I was thinking, that the Buhari administration will at least have bequeathed to Nigerians. Let's have a national interest to which other interests align. For instance, they will tell you there is telephone everywhere. But if you travel from here through Lokoja to Itobe, and then maybe you're going to Enugu, you see there are so many dead spots where you can't have service. Assuming there are crises on that road, but if these people travel by road, they will say these things. And they will formulate policies that will address them. But because most of the time, okay, you take your flight from here to Enugu, 45 minutes, 15 minutes, you're out. You don't know what other road users, other travelers are saying. Right. So there has to be clearly defined national interest or national ethos, like you have said.
Well, Mr. Okoye was speaking on our breakfast program, Sunrise Daily, but he wasn't the only one. On the other hand, the senior special assistant to the president on media and publicity, Mr. Garba Shehu, says President Buhari has enjoyed a successful tenure in office and that those who criticize him now will sing his praises when he leaves office.
For raising power availability to 20,000 megawatts, for doing second Niger bridge, for paying pensions, for doing bridges, local Wetu, all of these things, social investment. Never have we seen this in size and performance on the entire continent. 4 million children taken off the streets, out of school children, removed from the streets and put back in school. And so there's so much to remember President Muhammadu Buhari for. President Muhammadu Buhari is a victim of the tyranny of expectation. And Nigerians thought he will solve all the problems of the country in 8 years. There is never a country on earth that has solved all problems 100%. But President Muhammadu Buhari has done his best for the country. He deserves to go home and rest, and Nigerians will cherish him afterwards. The honeymoon period for Nigerian governments is a very short one. And they welcome you, they love you, but from the beginning, shortly afterwards, this love turns into hate. We don't like our leaders. It is after they leave office that we begin to shower praises and love them. So we are content with that. That's why we are not bothered. We go and sleep very soundly. They abuse all of us. The crown is on our head today.
Right.
It will move from President Buhari's head to the head of President Asiwaju Tinubu in a few days.
We'll have more on the crown movements, and that's when we return after this break. Stay with us. Welcome back. And chairperson of the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, EFCC, Ms. Abdulrasheed Bawa, has presented a souvenir to President Muhammadu Buhari as a memento of the Commission's performance under his watch. The event held at the State House, Abuja, where the President commended the EFCC boss and expressed interest in the outcome of the Ministry of Power's investigation by the Commission. The EFCC is also on the lookout for some outgoing governors, as they have put on alert their officers at the airport not to allow anyone leave the country after May the 29th. Mr. Bawa was appointed by President Buhari February 2021 and was later confirmed by the Senate in the same month. The president will on May 29th finish his 8 years of two terms in office when he hands over to the new administration. And plane for the proposed Nigeria Air will arrive tomorrow ahead of the commencement of operations. That's according to the Minister of Aviation, Hadi Sirika. The minister said that the Nigeria Air aircraft will land in the country in 2 days as part of the processes to commence operations and unveiling of the delivery process. He promised that the aircraft will be unveiled in Nigeria's colours in fulfillment of all the promises made by the administration in the aviation sector. He noted that the only incomplete item is the Aerotropolis, which is the airport's city and is 60% complete. Mr. Sirika, at an aviation stakeholders forum in Abuja in March, said that Nigeria Air will commence full operations before the end of the President Muhammadu Buhari administration. Let's go back talking about activities leading up to Inauguration Day. And I understand Dr. Kayode Shola is joined now. He's a research professor at African Politics at the University of Lagos. Welcome again.
Yeah, thank you. It was
okay,
a bit
great.
difficult.
I know. I know, no worries. It's glad to hear you. So talk to us. I want to begin this time around from what we're hearing, and this is from the presidential spokesman. He said that President Buhari is a victim of the tyranny of expectation. What are your thoughts on those comments when he was trying to explain the number of years or well, give his opinion on the 8 years of President Buhari?
Well, I agree with the presidential aide who declared that Buhari was a victim of expectation. It was not the fault of the victim. It is the fault of the Nigerian people who probably did not distinguish between expectations and capacity. One is emotive, You can have your expectation from anybody. It is determined by you. The other one is closer to fact. Maybe the greatest undoing that characterized Buhari's administration is that people had very high expectations in 2015, but they could not connect the expectation to the capacity and the ability of the man from whom they expected. And that, for me, created the crisis of expectation. Then as a people, we need to ask ourselves at this point, if we are not making the same mistake, what are the expectations from the current political dispensation that will become a reality, hopefully, in a few days? And do we fall in line with the capacity and capability of the man who is going to drive the political system? If we made that mistake in 2015, I don't think it is correct for us to make it this time around. If we're about to make it, this is the time to be more critical so that we hit the ground running. That's my thinking at this point.
And perhaps these expectations are closely related to hopes, hopes of, a better country, a better working country for the future. But then this is a transition moment. We're seeing loads of activities lined up this week to culminate on Monday. What are the significance? And this is when you look back at history of these activities as we, go into another administration, another cycle, it would seem.
Well, the audio still is not very clear, but I could pick the parts, within the sentence line. For me, we have had some 8 years of political dispensation in Nigeria. And what is clear, and that is without prejudice to the performance of President Buhari, what is clear is that the expectations of Nigerian people have not been met. Maybe on the part of the Nigerian people, the expectations were too high, considering the person in office. Or maybe the person in office was too low compared to the expectation of the people. That would be judgmental. What is clear is that from the social media, from conferences, from research activities going on, from the mainstream media, from the street, vox populi, it is clear that the last 8 years of President Buhari has not met the expectation of the Nigerian people. And that is significant. But it is not unique, because if you historicize into those who came before Buhari, you're likely to get the same thing. So could it be that the expectations are higher as each administration comes in? This is an issue that we need to determine. For this person coming in, hopefully in a few days, I think the point that must be made is that the expectations are not only high this time, but they are precise and specific. People could mention to you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 problems that have ravaged Nigeria in the past 8 years. And they are simply expecting the current president to.
All right. Wish we had more time, but would like to thank you in the middle of, the audio issues. Thank you so much, Dr. Kayode Shola, Research Professor of African Politics at the University of Lagos. Thank you for joining us on the program. Well, let's go over to events that played out at the lower house yesterday. Plenary was expected to begin early, and then after the tension between the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Femi Gbajabiamila, and his deputy Idris Wase, both men openly disagreeing over the duration of plenary, with the Speaker insisting that proceedings should be short enough to allow him and other members attend the official commissioning of the permanent site of the National Institute for Legislative and Democratic Studies. It's been referred to as quite a spectacle, but that's our program this afternoon. Thank you for watching. I'm Millicent Walker.